drawing more fans from all over the world.
Local consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% rate in April.
Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences. Like the number of hybrid cars registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million using its locally developed Yuri rocket.
Arirang. Gyeongju, a city that holds 1,000 years of history. The cherished values, preserved over time, have shaped who we are today. Now, through new encounters, we step into a better future. Sustainability, innovation. With the spirit of connection, a new millennium story begins. As APEC and Gyeongju come together. APEC meets Gyeongju.
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing. This uniform shapes movement into grace and turns performance into something thrilling. Now, embraced around the world, Taekwondo shares our culture, philosophy, and values with pride and spirit. Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
President Lee Jae-myung will deliver his first address to the UN General Assembly early on Wednesday morning Korea time. He's expected to highlight South Korea's rapid restoration of a democracy following the December martial law order and lay out his foreign policy vision. And on the sidelines of the assembly, top diplomats of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan met and issued a joint statement on the three countries' firm commitment to the complete denuclearization of North Korea. Meanwhile, it was another bullish day for South Korean shares, which reached a new high for the second straight session on Tuesday on the back of a semiconductor rally, putting the benchmark Kospi within reach of the 3,500 mark. We begin in New York, where the 80th UN General Assembly is taking place. And there, South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung will make his UN debut by addressing the Assembly in the coming hours for the very first time. Our senior presidential office correspondent Yoon Jung-min leads us tonight.
President Lee Jae-myung touched down in New York on Monday local time, opening his 5-day U.S. trip to attend the 80th session of the UN General Assembly. The general debate of the session runs from September 23rd to 29th under the theme Better Together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights. In line with that, President Lee will address the 193-member body chamber on Tuesday local time as the seventh speaker. On Wednesday, Lee will chair an open debate at the UN Security Council, a first for any South Korean president, as Korea assumes the rotating presidency of the 15-member body this month. Discussions will be centered on AI and international peace and security. A number of bilaterals are also scheduled, including one-on-ones with UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres and the leaders of France, Italy, and Poland to discuss bilateral cooperation, including on the defense industry. An official summit with U.S. President Donald Trump is not planned, though it remains to be seen whether there will be a pull aside. On Thursday, before he closes out his U.S. trip, Lee will host the Korea Investment Summit with U.S. financiers on Wall Street to encourage investment in South Korea. As President Lee makes his debut on the UN stage, the highlight of his trip would be his UN speech slated for Tuesday, with the focus on the resilience of South Korea's democracy, his peace vision, and Korea's global contribution. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, New York.
On Monday, President Lee started off his New York trip by sitting down with the head of the world's largest asset manager, BlackRock. The two agreed to collaborate on solidifying South Korea's position in the global AI industry as Asia's AI capital. Our top office correspondent, Jeong Ji-young, reports.
Turning South Korea into Asia's AI capital. That's the vision that President Lee Jae-myung and BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, agreed to pursue together. It was the focus of Lee's first appointment in New York on Monday, a meeting with BlackRock CEO and World Economic Forum co-chair Larry Fink.
과학 기술에 대한 관심도 높고 우리 국민들이 이 변화를 새로운 변화를 받아들이는데 아주 익숙해서 앞으로 인공지능 중심 사회로 또 재생에너지 사회로 신속하게 바꾸는 데 있어서 아마 세계적으로 매우 모범적인 국가로 갈 수도 있습니다.
According to Lee's senior secretary for AI and future strategy, Ha Jung-woo, Fink expressed strong interest in investing in South Korea's AI and energy infrastructure, two of the Lee administration's key future growth engines. BlackRock is spearheading global investment in these areas by launching the AI infrastructure partnership with Microsoft, NVIDIA, and xAI. Those shared priorities took shape with the signing of a memorandum of understanding. The centerpiece is the creation of a hyperscale data center in South Korea, which can meet demand not only at home, but across the Asia-Pacific region.
Building this requires semiconductors, batteries, telecommunications, power, cybersecurity, and cloud technologies, combined with renewable energy generation, storage systems, and grid infrastructure. It will revitalize Korea's industrial ecosystem while giving Korean companies a competitive edge globally.
The MOU also lays the groundwork for a massive joint investment to support the APAC region's AI and renewable energy transition. While the exact amount will be decided once a joint task force is set up, the presidential office says the figure will be in the trillion-won range. Later in the day, President Lee met with U.S. lawmakers urging Congress to play a more active role in advancing South Korea-U.S. relations.
With diplomacy and the economy being the key themes of President Lee's visit, his first day in New York reflected just that. Now more spotlight will fall on Tuesday when the president takes part in this year's United Nations General Assembly High-Level Week. 송유진, Arirang News, New York.
And President Lee also met with Korean Americans on his first day in New York, pledging to make South Korea a country that Koreans living abroad can take pride in. He said it's time for the country to return to normalcy and live forward, adding that overseas Koreans once had to worry about their homeland, but from now on, Korea will care for them. Lee was likely referring to the recovery following the declaration of martial law by his predecessor last December. He also vowed to improve the overseas voting system for Koreans to address the difficulties they're facing. Also in New York, the foreign ministers of Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo took time to reiterate their solid commitment to the complete denuclearization of North Korea. Our Kim Bo-kyung has more on their joint statement.
The top diplomats of South Korea, the United States, and Japan in a joint statement have reaffirmed their firm commitment to the complete denuclearization of North Korea. The foreign ministers of the three countries met on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly high-level meeting in New York on Monday local time. South Korea's Foreign Minister Cho Hyun, along with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Japanese Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya, added that effort to maintain peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula will continue to be made through dialogue and diplomacy, a phrase not found in the previous trilateral statement issued in April. The joint statement draws attention as it comes just a day after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un stated in a speech at the Supreme People's Assembly that he is open to talks if the U.S. drops its denuclearization demands, but that he has no intention of stopping his nuclear stockpiles. The three ministers also stressed the need to address together the regime's nuclear and missile programs and to maintain and strengthen the sanctions against North Korea by responding firmly and in cooperation with other countries to violations and evasions of the relevant UNSC resolutions. This, too, could be seen as a response to Kim's remark that it would be a mistake to think Pyongyang could be pressured or subdued through sanctions or shows of force. Serious concerns over North Korea's growing military cooperation with Russia, as well as worries over increasingly frequent destabilizing actions around the Taiwan Strait, were included in the statement. In terms of Washington's extended deterrence for South Korea and Japan, the U.S. reaffirmed its commitment, stressing that this is crucial for security and stability on the Korean Peninsula and in the wider Indo-Pacific region. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The KOSPI continues to show strength with a new record for the benchmark rate being set yet again. Now, the next big milestone is 3,500 points, and this doesn't seem far away. But there are some signs that reflect points to be wary of. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
The KOSPI continued its upward trend for a second consecutive day, briefly hitting a new intraday high. On Tuesday morning, it rose to 3,494.49, with the market now seen on the verge of breaking the 3,500 milestone. However, the initial momentum slowed during the day as it closed at 3,486.19, still a significant increase compared to the beginning of the year. The rally is being fueled by strong foreign and individual investor buying. In contrast, institutional investors have been net sellers. Leading this charge are South Korea's two largest companies by market capitalization, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. Samsung Electronics rose to a new 52-week high of 85,900 won during trading, with some securities firms now raising their target price to the 100,000 won range. SK Hynix also continued its ascent, trading in the 360,000 won range. This bullish sentiment in the semiconductor sector follows a record-setting session on Wall Street overnight, where all three major U.S. indices closed at all-time highs, driven by gains in tech giants such as Nvidia and Apple. But amid the overall gains, there are some points to watch as only big-name stocks are driving it up.
The significant point is that Samsung Electronics, SK Hynix, and Samsung Electronics preferred shares. Just these three stocks alone account for over 17 points of the index's movement. In other words, although Celltrion also contributed 3 points with its 7% rise, the index would actually be in negative territory if these three stocks were excluded.
In addition, investors should be aware that there are signs the market is overrated, considering the KOSPI's 12-month forward price-to-earnings ratio was noted to be around 10.4 times, slightly above its 3-year average of 10.2 times. Some analysts point out that if it's above average amid a global economic slowdown, this could mean it is overrated. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Bringing together the world's top figures in the cryptocurrency industry, Korea Blockchain Week 2025 has just convened here in Seoul City. Our Park Jun-han was there.
Thousands of participants and hundreds of cryptocurrency industry experts have gathered here in Seoul. Welcoming the opening of Korea Blockchain Week 2025, Eric Trump, World Liberty Foundation co-founder and second son of U.S. President Donald Trump, delivered a video address.
I have to say the Korea holds for the blockchain space is remarkable. This trajectory really makes it clear that Korea is poised to establish itself, no different than America, as the undisputed leader in blockchain industry in Asia.
The founder and CEO of FactBlock, which hosted the event, explained that South Korea holds the number 3 position in terms of market size in the crypto industry. According to a Korea Financial Intelligence Unit report for the second half of 2024, people in South Korea traded cryptocurrencies worth 7.4 trillion Korean won, or roughly $5.3 billion daily. Active investors in the same period numbered 9.7 million. In July, the U.S. Congress passed the Genius Act, which aims to provide a clear regulatory framework for stablecoins. These refer to digital assets designed to keep a steady value, usually by pegging to a fiat currency like the US dollar or other assets, making them useful for payments, remittances, and fast cross-border transactions without the costs of traditional finance. When asked if the world's largest stablecoin producer plans to expand its business to Korea, former White House crypto advisor and current CEO of Tether USA, Bo Hines, replied by saying,
"The way in which we move money is going to change very rapidly. As this technology is integrated into the current financial system, you'll start to see wider adoption, and this will change the way in which people send money to each other, whether it's friends and family overseas or global remittances."
However, there are some concerns that the virtual assets industry in South Korea is facing. A lack of infrastructure, the monitoring of transaction activities, and insufficient investor protections were constantly raised as challenges, creating multiple delays in the implementation of crypto taxes. Moreover, if the US dollar-based stablecoins enters the market, the relatively weak Korean currency could face challenges if dollar-based coins are widely used in Korea. Regarding the raised concern, Stable CFO Brian Mailer, whose company builds a blockchain designed mainly for Tether transactions, answered that it is actually helpful for the economy as it brings down barriers.
If you want to move that money, you're paying fees in different currencies, and that lessens the amount of money the seller is receiving in that sense. So it becomes a blocker. Transactions across borders with a free and open system that allows people to transact in a stable currency. I think it actually increases because it removes barriers.
With millions of active domestic investors, South Korea's cryptocurrency sector keeps growing, with global institutions and crypto companies eyeing the Korean market. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
Now, South Korea's shipbuilding industry has successfully seen the incorporation of its technology into global standards for LH2 carriers. The Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries announced on Tuesday that South Korea's membrane-type hydrogen cargo tank technology has been incorporated into international standards. This comes as a revision of the interim recommendations for the carriage of liquefied hydrogen in bulk, which Ministry proposed was adopted at the 11th session of the International Maritime Organization. Now, if the revision receives a final approval next year, it'll pave the way for LH2 carriers to be built using Korean technology. Korea's first ever special medical facility to treat patients with infectious diseases, a key task in preparing for future pandemics, is set to open in 2027. Commissioner of the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency, Im Seung-kwan, visited the site of the Joseon University Hospital in Gwangju to inspect the progress of the construction, which began in June of last year. The hospital will serve as a control tower to respond to infectious diseases and is expected to provide rapid diagnosis of new infectious diseases, intensive care for critically ill patients, systematic patient triage and transport management, as well as education and training of personnel. The hospital plans to have 98 beds, of which 36 will be negative pressure isolation beds. And this week at the National Assembly, the rival parties are set for a heads-on clash over the amendment to the Gov't Organization Act. The ruling party plans to pass it on Thursday, while the opposition intends to respond with a filibuster. For more, we turn to our political correspondent, Shin Ha-young. Welcome back, Ha-young.
Great to be here.
So, Ha-young, how far has the amendment progressed at the National Assembly ahead of the big day, Thursday's plenary session?
Well, the amendment to the Gov't Organization Act, which includes the abolishing the prosecutor's office, as well as splitting the finance ministry, has passed a related standing committee at the National Assembly. The ruling Democratic Party on Monday pushed the vote through the Public Administration and Security Committee, while the main opposition People Power Party walked out. And the DP said the bill is well prepared after more than a month of discussions in the State Affairs Planning Committee. The PPP, however, argued that no bill should be passed just 10 days after being proposed without even a hearing. Take a listen.
Before worrying about the government reorganization plan, the People Power Party should worry about reorganizing itself first.
How far will this legislative dictatorship go? Trying to finish everything by noon again, right? Isn't this just rushing toward the goal without thinking?
And under the plan, the prosecutor's office will be dismantled and replaced by two new agencies, one under the Justice Ministry handling indictments and another under the Interior Ministry handling investigations. And the PPP criticized the plan, calling it reckless to abolish the prosecutor's office without a plan for the remaining staff. And regarding concerns about potential delays in investigations, the Interior Ministry said that separating investigations and indictments will clarify responsibility and make work more accountable.
Like I mentioned earlier, the opposition is not too fond of it. Now, the question is what steps will the ruling party plan to take next?
Well, despite the opposition backlash, the amendment is expected to clear the Judiciary Committee on Wednesday, which is tomorrow, and head to a vote in a plenary session on Thursday, with the DP standing firm on its plan to pass it.
We push reforms quickly through the Lee Jae-myung administration's one-team approach and open debate. The next step is to pass the government reorganization plan to stabilize the cabinet and sustain momentum in state affairs.
And in response, the PPP decided today to launch a filibuster on the revision to the Gov't Organization Act and on every other bill that comes up during Thursday's session. And the PPP floor leader told party lawmakers to adjust their schedules for a possible filibuster, adding that all overseas activities are banned from now on. And the DP had initially planned to handle 69 non-controversial bills as well on Thursday, but is now considering taking up only 4, including the Gov't Act amendment. And apart from the filibuster, the PPP is expected to hold a second round of street rallies this weekend. And last weekend, the party held its first street protest in nearly 6 years, staging a large rally to protest what it described as opposition crackdowns and authoritarian politics under President Lee and the ruling party. Take a listen.
Dictatorship must never return to Korea. I ask everyone to stand together to stop any authoritarian ideas.
Then, Ha-young, what's next for the National Assembly? I mean, what lies ahead in the political standoff between the rival parties?
Well, with the regular session still underway, more contentious issues are expected in the weeks ahead. And in fact, the National Assembly's audit of government ministries and agencies is scheduled to begin on October 13th, with the lawmakers reviewing performance across policy, spending, administration, and public impact. And lawmakers will also need to tackle the 2026 budget and other key reform bills, but sharp bipartisan divisions remain even before these issues arise. And in fact, the launch of a joint consultative body on livelihood-related matters composed of both parties has been set back due to the ruling party's push for the government reorganization plan. And although the rival parties initially agreed to establish the body and hold its first meeting last Friday, the PPP announced that the launch has now been postponed. And with this setback and other key developments, attention will remain on the upcoming events as the regular session unfolds.
Well, let's see how things unfold on Thursday, the plenary session. Thank you, Ha-young, for the wrap-up.
My pleasure.
South Korea's largest international film festival, BIFF, is well underway in the southern port city of Busan. While many legendary filmmakers have visited, our culture correspondent Park Kwon-woo sat down with the country's oldest director.
79-year-old director Jeong Ji-young received a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Busan International Film Festival, but he admits the moment was bittersweet.
At first, a bit sad. I got to think of my age, which I didn't before, and I'm not that incredible, so was a bit embarrassed. I just lived as who I am, making movies. I just hope people don't treat me differently after winning the award.
Jeong has spent decades making films, often under challenging circumstances, but he shared where his continued passion comes from.
Honestly, I just did it, and I was fortunate over the years. Many fellow directors who started with me aren't making films anymore. Opportunities come if you work hard. Of course, everybody does their best.
He said he was lucky again to raise funds through a public campaign to work on a new project set to be released in theaters next April.
I am proud of making the first popular film about the Jeju, April 3rd incident, which has usually been made in indie or documentary films in the past. I thought the incident doesn't have a precise name because people call it in their own way. The title is My Name Is, hoping it helps find its identity.
He also praised the talent of Korean movie makers amid the recent global popularity of Korean content.
Koreans are naturally talented. In the past, it took a lot to make an actor. These days, if we help them a little, their potential is fully realized. There's so many great actors now. It's all about developing that talent.
Despite that, he spoke about challenges the Korean film industry is also facing, including shrinking audiences at theaters.
지금 한국 영화 산업이 위기라는 지적들이 있습니다. 이 상황을 어떻게 바라보시는지 또 앞으로 어떻게 극복해야 된다고 보시는지 궁금합니다.
Korean culture is trending globally, but to be honest, its roots are shallow. As in the past, we were colonized by Japan, and after the Korean War, we absorbed American culture. So arts policies need to strengthen the foundation and preserve our cultural heritage.
Stressing the need for governmental support, he added scholars need to study on how to make greater policies. But he also rejected the idea that Korean cinema must dominate the world like Hollywood.
Around 20 to 30 billion won is spent on Korean blockbusters. Hollywood films are almost 10 times that. But culture is for exchange, not domination. We need African movies. We need Latin American. Dominating the world with soft power isn't what we need to pursue.
And at the end of the day, director Jeong says he'll keep making films non-stop unless the audience stops wanting him. But even if so, Jeong says he'll keep working on film-related projects until the final scene of his life. Park Kwon-woo, Arirang News, Busan.
Today is the autumn equinox, meaning the length of day and night is the same. Even though most areas started cool this morning, the temperature rose to 27 degrees Celsius in Seoul and 28 degrees in Gwangju, higher than the average level. Rain is forecast across the country tomorrow and Thursday. Heavy autumn rain is expected again this time. More than 80 millimeters of rain will be concentrated in the Seoul metropolitan area, inland areas of Gangwon-do province, and the Chungcheong-do provinces. And more than 100 millimeters will also fall on the west coast of Chungcheong-namdo and western Jeollanam-do provinces. Seoul, Daegu, and Gyeongju will start off at 20 degrees, Gwangju and Busan at 23 degrees. Highs move up to 25 degrees in Seoul, 28 degrees in Daejeon, Daegu, Gyeongju, and Busan. This autumn rain will stop on Thursday morning. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
저는 만 5살에 바이올린을 시작했는데요. 바이올린 소리를 워낙 좋아했어서 그 특유의 따뜻함과 약간 사람의 목소리 같은 목소리를 갖고 있거든요, 바이올린이. 저는 무대에 올랐을 때보다는 이제 혼자 연습할 때 더 큰 희열을 느끼는데 제가 표현하고자 하는 음악이 잘 나왔을 때 그때 가장 큰 기쁨을 느끼는 것 같아요. 그래서 저만의 색깔을 어떻게 하면 찾아갈 수 있을까 그걸 제일 많이 고민하는 것 같아요. 아무래도 연습을 할 때는 이제 생각과 고민을 많이 하는 반면에 무대에서 연주할 때는 정말 머릿속을 비우고 아무 생각도 안 하려고 하는 것 같아요. 무대에서는 자유롭게 콩쿨 무대도 저만의 독주라고 생각하는 자세를 가지려고 하고 있어요. 사실 바이올린과는 거의 제 인생의 대부분을 같이 해왔기 때문에 저를 힘들게 할 때도 많지만 제가 가장 사랑하고 아끼는 존재입니다. 작곡가가 전달하고 싶은 메시지와 또 제 자신이 관객들에게 전달하고 싶은 메시지를 모두 다 설득력 있게 잘 전달할 수 있는 그런 연주자가 되고 싶습니다.
도시는 세계와 연결되어 문화를 창조했고 새로운 것을 받아들였다.
함께여서 우리는 더 자유롭고 더 멀리 갈 수 있어.
닫힌 문이 아니라 열린 질문으로.
나에게 에이펙은
자유,
융합,
국제성,
다양성, 포용,
개발.
신라의 정신이 에이펙 2025로 이어집니다.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-kyun. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung is making his global debut at the 80th United Nations General Assembly, a high-stakes stage for both symbolic messaging and strategic visibility. He'll deliver a keynote speech, chair a Security Council session on AI and global security, and meet with key players across U.S. politics and finance. While there's no formal summit with President Trump, South Korea's diplomatic bandwidth is being tested as Lee tries to reestablish Korea as a credible, democratic actor, all while defending its national interests. Tonight, we break down the meaning and momentum behind this visit. For this, we invite Frank Januzzi, President and CEO at the Marine and Mike Mansfield Foundation. A big welcome.
Nice to be here with you.
And also joining us is Hana Kim, Associate Professor at Seogang University's GSIS. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me again.
So, let's begin our discussion with Mr. Januzzi. So, like I said, this visit marks President Lee's first appearance at the UN. What's the broader international significance of this special moment, and what might the world be actually watching for?
Well, this visit comes at a time when President Lee is just establishing his presidency. And he's also establishing his leadership on a global stage of a middle power, which is no longer taking a back seat to anyone. The Republic of Korea is a top 10 economy, a top 10 security partner and power in the world, and also a leader in democratic values and democratic systems and human rights. And I expect the president to emphasize all of these points when he takes the stage today, and again when he takes the unprecedented position of being a South Korean president to lead the UN Security Council general debate tomorrow. For President Lee, this moment really signifies Korea's emergence on the global stage, as well as his own personal journey from mayor of Seongnam to president of the Republic of Korea. And so I believe that it's an important moment for him at a time when the United States is arguably stepping back on certain key issues such as climate change or on foreign development assistance. Will Korea be stepping up? And I think that President Lee's personal message of his own journey as a democratic leader in the Republic of Korea, as well as Korea's emergence as a nation, as a leading nation on AI, on high tech, on economic development, that will be the theme of the next couple of days.
Right, it will definitely be a very symbolic moment, especially as other middle powers also will watch how South Korea positions itself. Now, let's also invite Professor Kim into the conversation. So, from Seoul's vantage point, then, what does President Lee actually need to accomplish through this UN appearance in order to, solidify credibility as a diplomatic actor?
I think there's many things that he would need to do, but in order to kind of address that, we also have to keep in mind that he's going to be delivering the keynote speech tonight at the 80th United Nations General Assembly, and his speech is expected to be around 15 minutes long, and it's going to be taking place a little bit early on in the meeting, since I think right now he's slated to be around the 7th speaker. So during this speech, he's reportedly going to be declaring the return of democratic South Korea, and I think this was mentioned earlier, but he's also going to be presenting South Korea's foreign policy vision to the world. He's also going to be chairing the public session of the UN Security Council for the first time, and which emphasizes international cooperation on the theme of AI for all. So in order for President Lee to truly demonstrate that South Korea is a credible diplomatic actor on the global stage, he needs to go beyond these words and also contribute through tangible actions. And, for example, he could take a more proactive role in expanding international development aid, which was mentioned, and addressing multilateral challenges such as climate change and transnational crime. He could also concrete initiatives that Seoul can own diplomatically, rather than showing that South Korea can be a norm shaper rather than a rule taker. And so one prime example of this might be in terms of how South Korea could be emerging, or how South Korea could lead on emerging global issues such as AI, cybersecurity, digital governance, and energy transition. And this would actually really work well, given that the session he's going to be chairing is going to be the one based on AI for all. So President Lee has the opportunity to signal that South Korea is committed to not only advancing its own AI technology, but also to lowering barriers to its use, which could be very beneficial.
Right, so we will be looking for some kind of proactive measures that could lead to tangible outcomes in terms of global issues. Now, let's also touch upon inter-Korean issues, Professor Kim. What kind of strategic signals do you think President Lee is likely to send on North Korea at the UN, especially in light of, its military, closer ties with Russia?
I think what's really interesting about this event is that President Lee is attending this year's UN General Assembly, but North Korea is also sending a delegation for the first time in 7 years. And so this makes the messages that President Lee conveys towards North Korea particularly significant. And in a recent interview with Reuters, he indicated that he could accept a temporary and pragmatic freeze on North Korea's nuclear program, which suggests that this is a strategy that acknowledges North Korea's existing nuclear capabilities while also seeking to build trust and create a foundation for dialogue for gradual denuclearization. Now, President Lee also noted that former U.S. President Trump and Kim Jong-un appeared to have this mutual trust, and that leaves the door open for resumption of U.S.-North Korea talks. So from this perspective, South Korea may aim to serve as a pacemaker for dialogue between the U.S. and North Korea while attempting to restore trust and open channels for direct engagement with North Korea. But of course, we also know that North Korea has recently reacted negatively to these types of proposals. Recently, Kim Jong-un has made it quite clear that North Korea will not engage in talks as long as complete denuclearization is demanded. And he also rejected South Korea's overtures. So North Korea has also explicitly labeled South Korea as an eternal enemy and has refused inter-Korean dialogue. So within this context, President Lee is expected to strengthen cooperation with the international community and continue diplomatic efforts aimed at creating conditions for the resumption of talks. But also at the same time, he needs to seek ways to influence North Korea's position and encourage engagement.
Right. It's definitely a very complex situation that President Lee is in right now, and especially with North Korea, like Professor Kim has mentioned, is sending a high-level delegation to the UN in several years. Mr. Januzzi, how would you read into North Korea's actions then?
Well, North Korea is re-engaging after a period of self-isolation during COVID. And I think we saw with Kim Jong-un's visit to Beijing a much more confident North Korea on the global stage, striding alongside Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. And the dispatch of Vice Foreign Minister Kim to to New York City, although he ranks below in prestige and power, Madam Choi Song-hui, the foreign minister. This does, to me, signal an opportunity for North Korea and the United States, perhaps, to begin to pursue some quiet talks in New York. And I think this is the real meaning of North Korea sending the vice foreign minister to New York for the UN General Assembly. And this also presents an opportunity for President Lee Jae-myung, because no U.S. engagement with the DPRK can succeed without close and careful coordination with Seoul. So it remains to be seen. I'm not too bullish. I strongly agree with Professor Kim that North Korea is a reluctant player here in terms of engaging with the United States, and North Korea has laid down some very clear markers about what they don't want to talk about, namely denuclearization. But sometimes when North Korea says one thing, they mean the opposite. For instance, when they say that South Korea is an eternal enemy, I think what they really are saying is that's the current situation, and if you want to change it, it's going to require a lot of work. And I think President Lee has adopted a very pragmatic stance that basically begins with peaceful coexistence. That sets the bar at a low enough level that the nations might be able to get over it if they can start a dialogue. So I'm cautiously optimistic that this high-level North Korean delegation representing a more confident North Korea on the global stage may begin some quiet dialogue with U.S. and ROK counterparts in the context of the UN General Assembly, and that would be a very positive development.
Right, so it could actually be a stepping stone to resuming dialogue with the U.S. and South Korea as well. Now, speaking of U.S., the alliance management with Washington, of course. So we are aware that there would be no formal summit between President Lee and President Trump, but there are still a lot of bilateral issues that remain critical, like trade, supply chains, and also extended deterrence, of course. So, Mr. Junussi, what are some key points of tension or alignment between the two governments right now?
Well, thanks for the question. I was in Seoul last week and had an opportunity to meet with some senior government officials, as well as many scholars and academics and leading thinkers in Korea. And everyone was really focused on this $350 billion investment that has been requested by the United States, by South Korea into the United States. And realizing such a huge sum is obviously going to be very, very challenging. And let me just say for the record, that number is somewhat arbitrary. There's nothing magical about $350 billion. It could have been $500 billion or $200 billion. And I think that what South Korea is going to have to try to do is to figure out how they can symbolically recognize and meet the expectations of President Trump in order to secure lower tariff rates. But the devil will be in the details in terms of the timelines and what counts in terms of meeting that $350 billion target. President Lee has been pretty clear that he believes that trying to amass such a large sum of investment into the United States in a short period of time would be financially extraordinarily difficult, not to mention politically a strain on his support back at home. So I think he's going to have to walk a fine line, trying to accede to President Trump's demands while negotiating sufficient flexibility for South Korean industries and the South Korean government to have enough flexibility in the implementation of those commitments to not break the bank literally or figuratively.
Mm-hmm. So with this situation then, Professor Kim, how much room do you think does South Korean President Lee actually have to maneuver with these kinds of demands from Washington, given domestic sensitivities around strategic autonomy, economic dependence, and also public opinion, like Mr. Junussi mentioned?
I think I agree with Mr. Jeong on many of these points because it's true that South Korea is highly dependent on the United States in economic, military, and security matters. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that South Korea is completely in a subordinate position. There's still a little bit of room to maneuver, and domestic public opinion currently also supports the idea that South Korea securing greater strategic autonomy from the US is preferred. So in line with this, the United States may also not wish South Korea to be overly dependent, particularly in the security realm. So, within this context, President Lee needs to balance maintaining trust with the US while pursuing efforts to strengthen South Korea's independent capabilities, which would hopefully increase strategic autonomy in military and security matters. I think this was the fine line that Mr. Januzzi was mentioning as well. Economically, the U.S. and South Korea maintains a complementary relationship, with the shipbuilding industry being a prominent example of this. And so leveraging these complementary ties, South Korea can assert its position on maybe excessive U.S. demands. So President Lee's recent statements also suggest this as well. He indicated in an interview that fully complying with all of the U.S.'s demands could provoke domestic backlash, including potential impeachment or a second financial crisis. And so this suggests that even as an ally, South Korea is not willing to unconditionally accept all of the U.S.'s demands and intends to exercise, at least in part, its own judgment and leverage where possible.
Right, definitely. So he's really walking a fine line between asserting autonomy and managing expectations from Washington as well. Then beyond this government-to-government talks, President Lee also was actively engaged with financial and tech leaders. What does that actually tell us about the role of economic diplomacy in his broader foreign policy strategy, Professor?
I think he's signaling a strengthened focus on economic diplomacy beyond traditional government-to-government channels. In particular, he's scheduled to attend the Korea Investment Summit in New York on the 25th, where he's going to be presenting South Korea's economic policies directly to leading figures on Wall Street and solicit investment. And high-ranking government officials, including the Deputy Prime Minister and the Financial Services Commission Chairman, will also participate alongside SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won to reinforce private sector support. So these efforts indicate that President Lee's economic diplomacy strategy is oriented towards enhancing South Korea's international standing in the financial and tech realm through coordinated engagement between government and the private sector. But ultimately, by promoting global cooperation and investment in strategic industries such as semiconductors, batteries, and shipbuilding, and leveraging multilateral forums, President Lee is ultimately seeking to solidify its role as a trusted and influential actor in the international community based on South Korea's economic strength.
Right. Now let's go a little bit back to, the demands from Washington a while ago. In his recent interview with Reuters, President Lee actually warned that large-scale U.S. investments without a currency swap could expose Korea to financial risks. Mr. Januzzi, how do you think we should interpret this?
Well, I think this is part of a negotiating strategy. President Lee understands that as the leader of a market-based capitalist economy, he cannot simply command South Korean companies to direct investment to one place or another. And he's leery of undertaking commitments which he and his government and South Korean companies cannot fulfill. But I think what we're seeing is a continuation of what will likely be still several more weeks of negotiations with U.S. interlocutors before a final framework agreement can be agreed. And I would caution that even a so-called final agreement is one which is likely to be subject to renegotiation and reinterpretation in the months to come. This has been the track record of the U.S. Trade deals with the UK, with the EU, with Japan, and it will likely follow the similar pattern with the Republic of Korea. So the signal, the warning about the potential for a financial crisis I don't think we're really on the cusp of any financial crisis in Northeast Asia, but this is part of a negotiating strategy designed to maximize South Korean leverage. And I agree with Professor Kim that in trying to offer up alternative talking points, President Lee will highlight the many ways in which the Republic of Korea is contributing to American economic rejuvenation as well as American security. The investments in chips and AI and high tech in the United States, South Korea is either number one or number two over the last 5 years. And these are very significant investments that matter because they create American jobs. And the promises on shipbuilding is a gift to an administration that is eager to revitalize the industrial sector as well as to bolster U.S. national security. So President Lee has cards that he can play. And the warnings about a financial impact, I think, are just part of the overall negotiating strategy that will play out over the coming weeks.
Right. So it's not really too eager. Not a very serious situation to be concerned about, and we'll need to be.
I don't think it's too dire. That's right.
So we'll need to be a little bit more patient for details moving forward. Now, looking at the broader message then, President Lee has framed South Korea's return to the UN as a recommitment to multilateralism and rule-based diplomacy. And at the same time, he's also emphasized a pragmatic nation interest first foreign policy as well. So, Professor Kim, how do you think he can balance those two goals in practice?
Well, thankfully, I think multilateralism and rule-based diplomacy do not necessarily conflict with a pragmatic national interest-first foreign policy. And in fact, there are many areas where they align with South Korea's national interests. So achieving a balance between these two goals is therefore quite essential here. So to pursue them effectively, President Lee can adopt a pragmatic multilateralism approach. So in other words, this means that he can show respect for international norms and multilateral cooperation while ensuring that South Korea's strategic and economic interests are also clearly safeguarded in practice along the way. For example, on global issues such as climate change, global health, and semiconductor supply chains, South Korea can strengthen international trust and influence through multilateral collaboration. At the same time, South Korea can carefully adjust the terms of agreements or participation to protect domestic industrial competitiveness and economic benefits. Similarly, addressing North Korea's nuclear program through multilateral channels not only serves South Korea's security, but also contributes to stability across the Indo-Pacific. So given that the U.S. is exerting pressure on multiple countries simultaneously, coordinated responses with similarly positioned countries are also possible. And ultimately, President Lee is likely to pursue a balance between international norms and practical benefits, which would fulfill global expectations to a certain degree, while also maintaining flexibility to protect domestic industry security and diplomatic strategy.
Right. So maintaining a balance between, both, keeping commitment to multilateralism and also while doing this by maintaining pragmatic diplomacy is a very important topic to conclude our discussion tonight. Thank you so much for your insights, Mr. Januzzi.
감사합니다. Thank you very much.
And Professor Kim, of course, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.